In this episode of the Mighty Pursuit podcast, we have the honor of sitting down with the most famous man on Wall Street, Peter Tuchman. For over 40 years, Peter has been a trader on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Due to his resemblance to Albert Einstein, he started to become known as the Einstein of Wall Street in the mid-2000s. Because of the central role that money plays in each of our lives, today is going to be one of the most riveting conversations we've had to date. And few things are more symbolic with money and wealth than Wall Street. At one point or another, all of us have heard the phrase, money doesn't buy happiness, and yet we're still not convinced. Is that something rich people just say to make everyone else feel better? In fact, from an outsider's point of view, it would appear that money does unlock greater freedom, access, and power. And it's those things, we believe, that will make our lives better. Fortunately, few people have as much authority to verify if this is true than Peter. For over 4 decades, Peter has been immersed in the world of wealth. On a personal level, he has been extremely successful trading for large hedge funds, but he's also gotten an inside look into the lives of the wealthiest people in the world. Peter was on the floor for 2 major stock market crashes, first in 1987 and then again in 2008, which proved to be 2 of the gloomiest financial periods in American history. He's had plenty of experience witnessing people go from poor to rich and then again rich to poor. So in this conversation, we aim to set the record straight when it comes to money. What actually happens when you become wealthy? Does that improve your life, your relationships? Does it make you happier and more secure? After watching this episode, you'll leave with a greater understanding of how to frame money in your life and get a greater insight into the role it plays in the happiness equation. So without further ado, the Einstein of Wall Street. Peter, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. Thanks for asking.
It was such a honor to get to go down to the New York Stock Exchange yesterday. I mean, I've never done that before. And so it was just kind of surreal that that's like your everyday life.
Right? Yeah, I'm glad you came. That gives you a little better perspective of sort of my world, I think. So that was good.
Yeah. So obviously you're known as kind of the most photographed and kind of famous man on Wall Street. So how did that whole rise to fame begin?
So, look, my career has had all different, ebbs and flows and good times and bad times. And, majority of the time I was not known, before social media. A lot of my career was before social media, right? So I was just a trader on the floor. I mean, my personality has always been one that's been loud and boisterous and fun. And so I always had that persona on the floor. But it wasn't until probably 2006, I think, was the first photo taken of me. I was standing in the middle of the floor. My hands were up in the air, and a photo was taken by the Daily News. It got front page of the Daily News. And I think the market was down 600 or 700 points that day. And there had been a broker on the floor for many years who was always the guy they went to when they took photos. Because back in the old days, before social media and before media had its place on the floor, there weren't TV studios there, and there weren't a lot of press around. Getty Images and Reuters, all those guys weren't on the floor. So they would take a stray shot, on a bad day outside the stock exchange, right? So there was a guy they used to take pictures of. It wasn't me. And then it turned out that the day they took this photograph of me, the market was down 650 points. And it was the day that this gentleman actually was retiring. And so he saw the photo, and they wrote an article about me, and they quoted him, and he said, I'm known as the market dude, and I'm going to pass the baton to Peter, and he's going to take the ball from here. So that went from the Daily News to the Post, and then so photographs just started being taken of me all the time. It was sort of a mutual admiration society. None of these are posed, right? The photographers knew that if they took a shot of me, it would get on the front page, and for me, it was fun. I mean, I was enjoying the attention. So it went from the Post, then the Daily News did a shot, and then they did an interview. Who is this guy, right? I mean, we've seen him around for a while. And so that sort of started the ball rolling. That's 2006. It's way before even, Instagram and social media and stuff. And so photographs just started being taken of me, and they were on literally front pages all over the world. There's this website called Newseum, which is all the front pages from newspapers all over the world.
Don't they have is that a museum? That was a museum in D.C.? Is that
no?
A website?
I think it's just a web page called Newseum.
Okay.
And if you want to see all the front pages from all over the country, like every little newspaper from the Baton Rouge Gazette and all that kind of stuff. You can see it, and there would literally be thousands of them. Because people were starting to get involved in the stock market. People say, for a while there, the stock market was not something that got everyone's attention. But I would say around the financial crisis, everybody started paying attention to it, whether, somebody had money in a 401k that now is a 101k, or somebody they knew lost their job, or, whatever. People's eyes and people's concern focused on the stock market during the crash, the financial crisis of 07, 08. So the market was volatile. I'm a volatile guy. I've got that kind of crazy wild look. And so it was just, it was a mutual event that happened on a daily basis where the market would be wild and I'd be doing what I do. And, as I said, they're not pose pictures. So, I'm trading other people's money. So it's a very emotional, and I often just wear my emotions on my sleeve. So I'm in the midst of trading, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's stressful, it's exciting, it's fun. I love what I do. So and that kind of started the ball rolling.
And obviously you look a little bit like Albert Einstein.
I have a little bit of that look, yes.
So how did that nickname start?
So there was a lady named Erin Burnett. She is a CNN reporter. She used to be,
she is, yeah.
Right? So a really sweet lady. I've known her for many years. And she used to be, when CNBC came down to the floor of the exchange, they were also not always there. And I don't really remember what year that was. We became friendly. And there was a gentleman named Mark Haynes, who was one of CNBC's top reporters. He's passed away since then. And she started calling me Einstein. It just was a nickname. And then Mark Haynes, would sit outside every day smoking a cigarette in the morning before the market opened, and I would walk in, and he would, jokingly say that if Einstein's having a good hair day, then the market's going to go up, and that became sort of a shtick. And so she called me Einstein, and that was a nickname that sort of stuck, obviously because of the look. I know I look like him. I'm not that smart, and the Einstein of Wall Street, I really haven't figured that one out. It may have been a PR lady or someone else, but it became just sort of my persona. It ended up being a brand that I created, and there's a fun, longer story around how that brand started, but that's where I got So Erin Burnett has all kudos for that name.
So you've been on Wall Street for quite some time, 40 years.
Yeah.
There's few things that are like more symbolic with obviously money, but wealth than Wall Street itself.
Right.
Would you say that when people invest in the markets, would you say it's fair to say that they do that because they're looking to get wealthy? Like, what's their ultimate goal?
So you want to know what I think why do people invest in the stock market?
Yeah, what's their ultimate goal?
Obviously, they look, we are the greatest consumer generation in the world. We love to buy stuff. Right? We've got so much stuff. We want the next thing. The iPhone 13, we need the 14, even though our 13's not broken. You need the next sneaker that came out. You need the next this or the other or whatever it is. And we just love to collect things and accumulate stuff that the minute you buy it, most everything we buy goes down the minute you buy it in value. Virtually everything.
Yeah.
If you're collecting rare sneakers, maybe not. If you're a collector of Rolexes and cars, maybe not. But basically, the stuff we buy on a day-to-day basis that we use in our lives goes down in value, right? So unless you're wealthy, one's goal should be, and this is something I work with young people about right now, a lot is to invest, to build a portfolio, invest in your future, to buy stocks and not stuff, right? The basic mentality is if my iPhone 14 is not broken, right? I don't need the iPhone 15, but I want it. But so my suggestion to people is, and disclaimer, I'm not anyone's financial advisor, is maybe go out and buy a couple of shares of Apple. We are not only the largest consumer generation, but we're also the loyalist. We love what we love, right? We are either an Apple person or a Starbucks person or a Nike person, right? That's the way we are. We're just sort of wired that way. We love what we love. We're very loyal to it, the things that we consume, what we wear, what we use, right? So most of these things are actually public companies, right? Think about it. I mean, there was a period of time where I was trying to figure out a way, sort of like a rewards program. Like, there's this thing called Roundup, right? Where you can buy a Starbucks coffee for, $3.17, and then you round up to $4, and that money goes into I think it's called Acorn is the name of the thing.
Oh, yeah. I've
Right.
heard of
We're
that.
not endorsing Acorn, but it's a great idea. So it's like the change that used to be on your grandfather's
Yeah.
bureau, well, now could be rounded up and put in the stock market, right? So you buy a coffee for $3.20, you round up to $4, there's 80 cents, and it goes automatically through your card into the market. And so it's already being put to work. It's a great idea, right? So I had this thought, how cool it would be, well, if I drink Starbucks or I buy Nikes or I love Apple, every time I do that and I round up, it maybe should buy the stock that I'm perpetuating. Like, why, instead of just going into the stock market, that 80 cents, why doesn't that get invested into Starbucks or whatever I'm using, whatever I'm spending money on? It's a fun idea. But what I'm trying to just say is that if we think about it, the whole mental state, the whole psychology around investing in your future and buying stocks and not stuff, right? When I go around and I talk to young people in high schools and colleges and all over the place.
Which is a wise thing, to do.
Is to invest in stocks and not stuff, that maybe to buy something that potentially, no guarantee, could go up in value when you buy it.
Yeah.
Right? You look, when young people will ask me, Pete, what should I invest in? And I never give them advice. I'll say, go to school tomorrow and walk around and do a survey. See what phone everyone uses, what computer everyone's on, what sneakers they wear, what they do in their spare time, and what social media they're on. And what would you end up with? You'd end up with Apple for a phone and a computer, Nike for a sneaker, and this is not an endorsement, like that, right? And those are good companies. The companies have great products, process, people, and profitability. They are. So why not perhaps put some money to work there? We love to spend money. And so it's been said that if one was to so the S&P 500 is a basket of 500 stocks, right? It tracks basically the economy of the world in so many ways, right? It gives you exposure. If you were to buy, you can buy the SPY is what it's called. You can buy that entity, right? And that gives you exposure to all kinds of stuff. Some airlines, some hospitality, some social media, some housewares, whatever it may be. And so it's been said that if you, at the age of 18, were to put $250 into the S&P 500 every month, at the age of 60, you would have accumulated $1.6 million.
That's crazy.
Right? The 60-year-old part is not that sexy, but the 1.6 is. Yeah. Right? And so most people don't know that. Right, using dollar cost averaging and the fact that the S&P goes up at an average of about 10% a year, right? And this whole mindset that I'm putting money aside every month into this entity that goes up in value, well, that's kind of cool, right? And so money that you may not miss, I'm sure $250, a lot of people would miss it. Put $10 aside. $50 aside. It's just a mindset. It's just that's what I'm trying to get people to think about, is that we spend money on things we don't need. And I'm a really bad culprit. I do it too, right? I wish I listened to my own advice. Yeah. But if you think about it, and people don't do it because they don't know that little fact, that if I just, in the old days, Grandpa used to put his change in a big thing. And then, when you wanted to go out and buy a beer, you'd steal money from Grandpa, right? But if you think about it, if there was something and you knew that if I put money in a place that it would grow, and it would grow every year exponentially, then I would maybe think of doing that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different truths, if you will, about money. And what you're talking about, obviously, is a very wise thing to do, investing in your future. And it is unique about the stock market because everything that we buy is depreciating. And then, like you're saying, it's the one thing that you're going to get returns over a large period of time.
Correct.
But then there's this other truth in our culture, which we talked about online, is there's wisdom, but then there's, at the same time, there's messages about the overvaluation of money in terms of the idea that I think a lot of people have been told that money doesn't necessarily buy happiness.
Correct.
But I think there's still so much debate around that, and I think people certainly live as if it does. And I think it's tempting to treat money itself as kind of one of the holy grails of life, or the epitome of life, or what a good life looks like. And so, what do you think of that? Does money buy happiness?
Okay, so I don't think money buys happiness because I've seen, wealthy people who are miserable. Okay, so there's no direct link to it. I think what money does is it buys you freedom. It gives you the possibility of happiness, and it gives you the possibility to buy things that make you happy and to do it. It's really a matter of what you do. Look, it's not. Life is going to toss stuff at you. It's how you react to it. There are things. What do you do with your money? Right? It's such a complicated story, right? I mean, and to see about it, we also it's in a whole new place lately. Look, with the whole advent of social media and whatnot, and people sort of living behind the personas that most of them are not really real. And then we saw it a lot on Wall Street with the whole meme phenomenon and everybody and crypto and whatnot, and everybody claiming they made millions of dollars when in fact they probably didn't, and people, so the whole money thing can create a phenomenon which is unfortunate in a lot of ways, like envy and jealousy, right? Look, at the end of the day, there's so many different, I mean, just the thought of it is such a complicated story. Look, there are families that are living paycheck to paycheck, right? There are families that don't have savings, right? There are families that don't have enough to live on and that they don't have enough to feed their kids, and that's terrible, right? There should be enough money at the end of the day for everybody to be able to,
do those
live a comfortable life. I agree with that. And then there are people who waste a lot of money, and then there are people who brag about money, and then there are people who made a bunch of money and don't do particularly anything really great with it, look, and have a very strange relationship to money, right? Generosity is not something you can teach, right? Being stingy is, is sort of an unpleasant quality in a human being. But it's a matter of what you do with the money. I chose to, so I've never owned a share of stock in my life up until recently. That's a function of the fact that I'm in the business and I'm not really allowed to be in a stock for a customer and myself at the same time. So I'm a commission broker. I don't share in the profit and loss of my customers. I get paid a commission for every 100 shares that I trade. So that's my relationship with it. But so I did not invest in the stock market, and I regret that in some ways, but it's a legal thing. I'm not really allowed to do it. But obviously, look, I grew up, it's a matter of, look, it's such a contentious relationship that people have with money. People who grew up without it, people who nouveau riche, people who just made a bunch of money of it. I've had my relationship with money. So I said my parents are Holocaust survivors, came here with nothing. My father went on to become a doctor, and my mother was his secretary. They worked really hard. They had 2 kids, me and my brother, and they were comfortable. They were, I would say, middle class, upper middle class. Never had lots of money, but always had what we needed. And then I've had my time on Wall Street for 40 years. I've had time where I was really flush and I was making a lot of money and things were great, and then there were times where I was broke. There were times where I was actually broke. As I said, a couple of years where I was making no money and I was already had a wife and 2 children and I had responsibilities. And so, and for me at that point, it was devastating to, there's that terrible line, and there's somebody who I dislike with all of my every ounce of my being is Jordan Belfort. I don't think it's really his line, but I've been rich and I've been poor, and being rich is a lot better, right? Once you've had money.
It's a famous movie too. Just took off. I think people saw that movie.
Which the
Wolf of Wall Street. They saw that movie and it was like, oh my gosh, like having all this stuff and being rich is amazing.
Yeah. But that's the worst thing about that movie shows the worst part of having money, and in that way. Look, Jordan Belfort, greed, right? If you go back to the original Wall Street movie with Michael Douglas, right? There's that famous speech. He says, greed, for lack of a better term, is good.
Yeah.
Right?
Iconic line.
But if you look at Jordan Belfort, what he did was, first of all, everything he did on Wall Street was illegal. He was a pump and dumper. He was a front runner. He was a criminal in every possible way of the world. He came down to the floor of the stock exchange and brought people around, who offered people, dangled large sums of money in front of people who were willing to sell their soul to the devil for money. Right? If I give you $1 million, will you compromise your integrity and give me inside information? Right? And he went around. Some people said yes, some people said no. I was fortunately somebody who was not willing to do that. Those who said yes ended up being taken off the floor in handcuffs by the guys in
you were offered that
in
at one
windbreakers.
point?
Everybody there were a number of people on the floor who were offered the opportunity to do business with Jordan Belfort, to basically take their integrity as a broker on the floor and let him do front running. So what is front running? That means that if I have an order to buy 1 million shares of IBM, and somebody says to me, okay, I want you to buy the first 5,000 shares for me, and I want you to sell the last 5,000 for me. Okay, so think about it. If I have 1 million shares to buy, and so I'm probably going to buy it up, right? So what is front running? Front running is having the prior knowledge that somebody has a large buy order in a stock, and that for the most part they're going to buy it, and as they buy it, it's going to go higher. So if you buy the first 5,000 for Jordan, and then after you're done buying 1 million shares, the last 5,000 before you're done, you sell Jordan's 5,000. So he participated.
So it's illegal.
It's illegal.
Yeah.
Right? It's called front running. And the other thing that he did was what's called pump and dump, which is basically accumulating large quantities of penny stocks, and then have hundreds of people, as you saw in the movie, go out and cold call people, right? So he bought inventory of a penny stock. Then he would have hundreds of people go out and cold call people saying, I got a great stock for you. Go out and buy it. Go out and buy it. And then when they were buying it, he was selling it. Right? That's called a pump and dump.
Yeah.
Right. And so anyway, we don't need to spend too much time on him, but those are, so anyway, look, people have, when confronted by the possibility of making money and becoming wealthy and all that kind of stuff, it obviously tugs on that in your integrity. People have done all kinds of things to make money in their lives. They've dealt drugs. They've done, there are legal ways to make money and illegal ways to make money. I mean, we could talk around this.
Yeah,
in
I mean,
circles,
what you're really referencing, I think, is kind of a more nuanced view of money in general, because there is complexity around it, and it has to do with your background and where you come from and the messages that you get exposed to. And so money itself, obviously, it's like a tool. It's not a bad thing in itself.
No, not at all.
But then the way that it gets co-opted and the messaging around it causes people to think that it can do certain things for them and their well-being and their happiness that isn't necessarily true. So just being on Wall Street, so like over the years, kind of what have you observed about people that have means and wealth and like their sense of well-being? Do you notice that they generally seem happy and fulfilled, or is that more of another nuanced type of question?
Yeah, it probably is. Fortunately for me, the floor of the stock exchange, the people who I've worked with in my career are not people who came from money. Some are, but most of them are not. The street, as opposed to, as I described it earlier, you've got the upstairs guys who are the MBAs and those guys, and then the guys from the street who are from the neighborhood. Wall Street, New York Stock Exchange, right, was made up of most of the kids from the street. They grew up, in large families. They were Irish, Jewish, and Italian, and they did not have a lot of means. They came down to Wall Street, and they ended up doing quite well and making a lot of money. But it's a matter of really what you do with that money. Look, I've seen people who have lots of money who just like to spend it and flash it and don't do anything particularly good with their money, and does it buy them happiness? Not necessarily. And I've seen people, I would say for the most part, people who have had money and lost money and then had it again, or people who worked really hard and made money. And, you'll find that people who spend a large part of their life giving back, right, doing charity work, giving, are altruistic. And you'll see look, there's success. Success is a flush bank account where I can buy anything I need, and then there's fulfillment. It's a matter of what you do with your money, right? I was brought up by my parents, who obviously had gone through. They came from money. In Eastern Europe before the war, they lost everything. Everybody was killed in their families. They spent 4 years in prison. They came to America with nothing, started a family, and really savored and enjoyed family and being comfortable and having the things that they needed to. But I was taught that dying with the most toys was not that exciting, and that this journey we call life, the most fulfilling thing of all is empowering other people and helping people get their best life, right? And that was instilled in me in a big way by my parents. My father was a humanist. My father spent, after having gone through what he went through, he spent so much of his time giving back. We spent every summer growing up traveling around the world, working and doing public health. We lived in Guatemala, 8 hours by mule up in a Catholic mission hospital, taking care of kids who were dying of malnutrition. We worked in an Indian reservation in North Dakota. I mean, we did everything. My father, I'll tell a funny story. My father was just become a doctor in New York, and one of his professors was a guy named Dr. Jack Nelson, who was the doctor for CBS TV at the time. And my father had just finished his residency and his internship as a doctor, had just become a doctor and was starting a private practice. Dr. Nelson, who was a well-known doctor and was working for CBS, so he was taking care of more celebrity type of people, was given John Paul Getty, who in the 50s was the richest man in the world. At that time, he was in the Guinness World Book of Records. He was worth $2.1 billion, and he ran the largest oil company in the world. He had a son, a 13-year-old son, who was dying of cancer. And Dr. Nelson, who was my father's mentor and professor, and very went on to become his best friend, gave John Paul Getty lived in London, and his son lived in New York with with an ex-wife, I guess. And he was dying of cancer. And John Paul Getty did not fly, so he never came to the States to see his son. He wanted his son to get the best medical care. He gave Dr. Nelson was given his son as a patient, and he introduced the son to my father. My father became the son's doctor. Okay, he was 13 years old. And he took care of him for a year. Literally, it was his first patient. He gave everything he had to this young man, and he ended up dying. But he spent a whole year with him, day and night, taking care of him, and he ended up not surviving. He died of the cancer. At the end of it all, my father sent him a bill for $5,000 for professional services rendered, having been his doctor. And John Paul Getty, then the richest man in the world, sent a note. There was some time lapse where they didn't hear from him. And my father received a letter from John Paul Getty's lawyer saying, "We really appreciate everything you did for John Paul Getty's son. You took care of him and showed him such care and love. Right now, Mr. Getty is going through some financial difficulties with one of his shipping companies, and we wonder, could you negotiate the bill down a little bit because it's too expensive?" And my father, being horrified by the fact that the man worth $2 billion who had just lost his son was going to try and negotiate my father, down from his bill of $5,000 for taking care of this kid for a year, my father sent him a note and said, "It was an honor and a pleasure to know John Paul Getty's son. Why don't you forget the bill altogether?" And it was his first patient. And of course, my mother was, "What are you, crazy? I mean, we got to pay our bills." And he said, that's the way I roll. Don't just forget about it. And he ended up 2 months later received a check in the mail for $500 signed by John Paul Getty saying, "Gratis, we really appreciate the negotiation, and we just wanted to give you something to show our gratitude for taking care of his son." And my father died with that check in his wallet. He never cashed it.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So I say all that story just to say that money has such a strange effect on people, right? It can make somebody good, make somebody bad. It can control their lives. There are people out there who have very little and give of themselves, right? I've worked with some, and I think I'm winding around to a story because the floor of the stock exchange throughout my career has been the most philanthropic group of people. We run a charity every year called Member Handicapped Children's Fund, where we make an event where we do silent art auctions. We give money. We raise a lot of money for charity. In the old days, when there were thousands of people on the floor, anybody who was going through hardships, we would just walk around with a large garbage bag, and everybody would throw money in there. So when people have a good, healthy relationship with money and they know what it can do, right, and they're not just wrapped up in their own greed and whatever, it can do amazing things, right? When somebody who has nothing shares that with somebody else, when somebody who has something more than others and is able to share what they have and care and kindness along with it. So, I've seen the best of the best about what money can do and how it really can forge great relationships and do good. There's a gentleman who is a very close friend of mine. He runs a company called PCNY, Precision Concierge New York. He and his family, and I don't think they came from money, but they had a really strong family ethic as a family, everyone in the family. And he decided to create a soup kitchen in New York City around the time of COVID. And he has, since COVID, every Wednesday, it's now just recently been recognized by the mayor of New York, set up a soup kitchen for the last 4 years, rain or sleet or snow or whatever, every Wednesday. Now it's at 290 Bowery. They set up and they give away food and clothing and all kinds of things to people, right? They don't need to be doing that. They could, the other things he does is he does these amazing raffles and things to raise money for. There are people who commit their lives, like God's We Deliver. I don't know if you've ever done any charity work or you've ever done things like that. There's nothing better. It's the greatest feeling in the world, And so, being of service to others, is an amazing thing. That's really fulfilling. Granted, look, I work really hard and I make a good living, and my kids graduated without any debt. That was where I put most of my money. People ask me, are you rich? Yeah, I'm rich because I have a great family and I've spent a lot of my time, giving back and sharing what I have. And if somebody is in need, I'm always there to do that. I don't know, apparently on the internet it says I'm worth $1.8 billion, which isn't a fact. When that came out, my wife came up to me and said, is there something I need to know here? So,
Yeah. I mean, what you were talking about with the Getty story is just so fascinating because I feel like a lot of people feel like maybe there's this point that you get to where you're satisfied. There's a satisfied point of wealth, and here you have this guy who's worth like $2 billion. And I mean, like, what's a $5,000 check? And so, like, is there a satisfied point of wealth? Like, what do you think about that?
You know what? Look, it's funny too. You analyze some of there's the group of like the wealthiest guys in the world now who have now committed, half of their wealth. There's some organization, I guess, that whether this is real or not, like the Gateses and the Buffetts and the whatnot have started this foundation where they're putting half of their wealth into a big pool that when they die they're going to do all these wonderful things with it. Is there ever enough money? It's pretty crazy to, social media, whatever of it is real, to see the way people flaunt it, Look, I run I have a partner, his name is David Green. We started on Wall Street together. We built an academy teaching people to trade the market. And so we are sort of we started during COVID. And so we've seen people, we are sort of on the cutting edge of this new retail phenomenon of people who are suddenly making a bunch of money. And so I'm always fascinated by, there are people who didn't have any money, who came to Wall, started trading around the time of the GameStop and all that, and they made a bunch of money, and all they do is post flashy pictures of themselves with stacks of $10,000 bills on the back of a Bugatti, bragging about all their money. And then there are people who ended up making a bunch of money and immediately started to give back, started having communities where they're helping people to learn how to trade and whatnot. I mean,
which is a service part again that you're talking
the service
about.
part again. I think there are more than two kinds of people, but it's that, like, you think of the expression. There are two kinds of people. People who just want to make a bunch of money, or are sort of stingy, and they just want to do what they want to do. And then there are people who ever feel like there's a better calling. Whether money's involved, or whether it's service, or whether it's love and kindness, or whether it's education. People who commit themselves. There's David Meltzer. David Meltzer is an amazing gentleman. He was one of the Jerry Maguire story is about. He's the guy who came up with the concept of endorsements around sports, and he worked with Steinberg in sports management out in L.A. And he, by the age of 28, had made hundreds of millions of dollars, and then lost it all and went bankrupt. And
was that during the financial crisis?
What's that? Yes.
Okay.
And he lost it due to the financial crisis and due to a bunch of other reasons. But he basically had everything. He was at the top, and then he lost everything and was basically penniless and broke. And he really had to dig deep to really find, where do I go from here, right? And he decided to embark on a mission. The mission being to bring joy to 1 billion people in the world. And so if you read him, and he's a close friend of mine, he's a mentor of mine, and he's somebody that came into my world when I was dying of COVID, and he sort of helped me spiritually get out of that really dark place I was in at the time. But I've seen him, he is the best of somebody, in my opinion, and I surround myself by people like that. For me, money is a funny thing. It'll catch you off guard. Right? Sometimes its importance in your life, sometimes even to the best of people, it's can really tickle your some part of you. Like, I want that, and I want to be able to pay for that, and I want all that fancy stuff, and I want this, and I want that, And so I like to surround myself with people who have a healthy relationship with money, and so that I'm always reminded of the nuance of my relationship to money when money becomes too important a thing. Now, granted, people may say and listen to me and go, well, look at that guy, he's talking that shit, because he probably has a bunch of money and he can say that, and that's not who I am. I may be able to say that, speak this way, even if I didn't have a bunch of money. I don't have tons of money.
Yeah.
I'm not the guy people think I am if they think I'm worth billions of dollars. I worked really hard, and I'm comfortable, but I'm by no means wealthy in that regard. But if you ask me, am I rich? I'm rich because I have a really wonderful group of people in my life. I have a great family. I was brought up by people who really had a really good sense. And good integrity. Character is who you are when everybody leaves the room.
Yeah.
I look, and I've not always. I've had my ups and downs. I've not always been the most.
What do you think is the end game of people overvaluing money? Right. So if you describe these two types of people, and so if somebody is being flashy, or they are buying all the stuff or whatever, and then you have this other person that's being of service to other people, what do you think the end route to that is in terms of happiness and fulfillment of pursuing those two paths?
You're going to find those who are really, people are so consumed with being of service. And they are not always the most happy people in the world, but it's just, you get a sense of something that's extraordinary in them. Those people who are friends of mine, like his name is Wayne Schneider, and David Meltzer, and Wall Street Trapper, another gentleman who is, I've surrounded myself with people who their end game is sharing as much as they can, financially, emotionally, spiritually, with others, so that people can be their best self, right? And it's an ever ongoing, evolving story. Family first, yes, but service second. And then you've got the other people who, what's their end game? There's a whole breed of people. It's like who dies with the most toys wins, right? You know what I mean? And I don't begrudge anybody. If that's everybody has. I've got 12 Lacoste sweaters, and I'm really happy. Some people need the 12 Bugattis. I love to buy things too, and I love nice things. In that way. I don't know what the end game is there. Look, the question you're asking we could talk about it forever and ever, and it's fascinating to see. What I love seeing is people who are still in the midst of the struggle and are still of service, right?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, the financial crisis we've come up multiple times in this conversation, and so those are kind of two periods in American history where this intersection that we're talking about and like the effect that money has on people was just particularly like accentuated. And so, you were present for both of them, right? Recently, 1987.
I wasn't there for 29, although some say I was.
Yeah.
Yes, I was in 87.
Well, not 29, 87
and yes.
And so, like, what were those days like, especially in the there's like you see it from the outside. You've seen the movies like Big Short and all the stuff, people freaking out, but like you were there. So
it was extraordinary. Look, and it was something that you could feel it. It was palpable. I remember more. The crash of '87 was fascinating, and I was new on Wall Street, and I didn't know the community well, but I just remember I knew that people were going out of business, that people were losing millions of dollars, that stocks were going down. So that reality was amazing that, wow, things that go up can come down, and I saw people being dragged out of there, having market makers who had to buy stock from 160 down to 40, who lost their companies that night. And so that was pretty devastating. I think the most significant thing was the financial crisis, right? Where you saw people walking down the street, those days carrying boxes, from work, having been let go, people who lost fortunes. I'm reminded too, there's a photograph, at the stock exchange of the day of the crash of 1929. To think about that, there were billionaires and millionaires who became penniless, right? There were bread lines in New York, the day after the crash. People with wealth and money basically lost everything, and they were literally standing on bread lines begging for pennies. It was unbelievable. It was deep pain. I have to admit, though, that the feeling that was even stranger was then you had the crash of COVID, right? And what was fascinating about the COVID thing was that the difference was money is one thing and going broke is one thing. But what I saw in the eyes of people around the COVID days, where suddenly everybody started realizing this is real, people are dying. Like my grandma's I'm not talking about myself, but I was like trying to feel out the room, like those days where the market was crashing and people were starting to die in the streets of New York from COVID, and everybody started thinking about their mortality. Right, that's where the pavement hits the road there. Right, like you're having conversation with people worried about their grandmas who were in nursing homes. Right, remember that nursing home? People were dying like crazy. And realizing when we are confronted by our mortality, by losing all our money or losing our lives, it's a different feeling there.
Yeah.
That was a completely different.
Well, why do you feel so? You had this story you were talking about earlier where you were not making any money like during that time period, and you still showed up to work. And so, in a sense, it seemed like you dealt with, all things considered, dealt with it relatively well. But then it's felt like some people took it so hard. And so, obviously the headline news were the people that were committing suicide or jumping in front of trains and stuff like that. And so What do you think the difference is there? Why do you feel like some people felt like life was no longer worth living after that?
That's a hard question. We all have our look. I really attribute so much of my ability to weather that period of time from my being my parents' son, right? I'll get you a copy of it. My father wrote a book called Remember My Stories of Survival, right? So my father spent 4 years in a concentration camp, being walked from hundreds of kilometers, thousands and thousands of kilometers, watching people die. His mother was murdered in front of him, shot in the face by a Gestapo, all that kind of stuff. And how does somebody get through that? We can't even imagine what they went through. My mother lost 2 sisters, died in her arms, weighed 50 pounds of typhus and starved to death in her arms. How does somebody get through that, go on and keep living, right? And, when confronted by the worst of the worst that humanity can offer, not financial, and the financial part didn't have anything to do with it, but where your life is in question. How do you dig deep down in order to, so you ask, how did some people survive that experience and some didn't, right? And I would ask my parents how they did it, and my mother would say it was a day at a time, that they had this inner sense where they wanted to survive, to be able to tell the story of what happened to them and their ancestors. That was it. They stayed alive for one purpose, and that purpose was to bear witness to what had happened. That was what their impetus was. That was the spiritual point where they had to dig deep down into to be able to get them up, in the morning. My mother would describe, and it was a terrible memory of mine as a child, because she would describe it to me, and I was really young, of lying in there were 3 cots. There were 3 cots in a barracks, and there was no windows, and it was 30 below zero in the winter of 1939, and they would sleep 5 deep in each cot, and then she would wait for the lady next to her.
This is in Germany, concentration camps.
In Auschwitz, in Bergen-Belsen, the worst concentration camp. And she would wait for the lady next to her to die so that she could steal her shoes or to take her dress so that she could keep herself warm. How does one get through that? They grew up. They were very comfortable. They were upper class growing up. And then and then the war breaks out and they go through this. But we're talking about, how does somebody dig deep to spiritually find a way to dig themselves out to survive, right? Because when someone's confronted of losing everything, and someone kills themselves, no begrudge them. That's what they needed to do. That was their solution, right? Suicide is a short-term solution to a much bigger problem. It's look, I've had some hard times in my life. I lost both my parents. My brother died of cancer at the age of 60. He was super young. I just recently lost my wife. She died. She was young, and we were together for 30 years. And so I've had a really hard time, and it's like, do I want to wake up and keep going? Well, there are days I don't. There are days where I have 2 beautiful children. That keeps me going. But, after so much loss, sometimes you just want to say, F it, and just, and just, jump, really. There's how much emotional pain and suffering and loss can one person take? And I've had a lot. However, you dig deep down. When I was dying of COVID and I was really sick, and I was told I have like 3 or 4 days left to live, I found a way to dig my way out of that, and some of it I did on purpose, and some of it came naturally, and some of it was like, I felt that I needed to survive to tell that story that my parents survived for. So we each have this journey. We each have sort of an inner spiritual resilience that it's in there, I think, in everybody. It's just a matter of finding it and digging it. People hit rock bottom.
You consider yourself a spiritual person?
I do, absolutely.
Was that always the case, or?
I don't really know. I don't think it played as big a role in my life as it does now after all the loss I've gone through and whatnot. I would imagine at some point probably it was always there. But, when you deal with success and failure, right? You deal with loss and grief. You either get really hard or you get spiritual, right? You're trying to find a solution to be able to wake up in the morning and do the next right thing, and have a positive effect on the world and on your family. And so a spiritual solution is a good one. That gives you the sense that you're not alone, that there's maybe there's a power greater than us that can help you get through some of this stuff. I have to realize that my close relationship to my parents, they had numbers branded on their arms. It's not like 3-4 generations ago. It was my parents. I'm a young guy. They lived into their 90s. They went from being a wealthy, healthy, beautiful, strong family to literally, being starved to death and killed and murdered and gassed and blah, blah, blah. And they were able to find a way. I have an older brother, a gentleman, I mentioned him a little bit, who my father adopted during the war, who lost his parents. My father and my grandfather adopted him. He was emotionally scarred by his experience and was not able to experience joy after the war, right? There are a lot of people came out of that experience so scarred that they were not able, they went on to live very productive lives. He was an amazing, he's my older brother. He has an incredible family, and he was productive and loving and kind, and one of the biggest heart givers. He's built hospitals and museums for the Holocaust, all kind. He's given back 10 times over. However, spiritually, he was never able to get beyond what he experienced. So and I don't think my parents were either, but they were able to find other routes.
The suffering, you mean?
Correct. The suffering, the trauma, the post-traumatic stress of living in prison and watching their parents be gassed in front of them and grandmother shot in the face, all that kind of stuff. We can get beyond, we can live through it and be so scarred that it affects our everyday, or we have to sort of bob and weave and same thing. I'm dealing with the grief of losing my wife and my brother. We're all going to lose our parents, and that's cool. But surely, losing a brother really young and a wife really young, it's like it can define. It's a matter of we let our past define us, or we let it be our strengths to go further and forward, right? And it's a matter of to go out there and see if I can share whatever I've learned from this experience, whatever that spiritual strength and resilience I've been able to find to keep going, and maybe share that with somebody who's going through the same thing.
Do you believe in God?
I do believe in God. And that's curious because my parents did not believe in God. Now, my parents came from, they were like Eastern European Jews. I would imagine my great-great-grandfather was probably one of those, sort of old religious. I've seen pictures of some of the way back in time were probably very religious Jews, and then it sort of, they were not as much. My father did not grow up religious, very traditional. My mother grew up a little more religious, and their belief was that after having survived what they survived, that if God was a God of goodwill and justice and all that, then he couldn't exist, because how could any God allow such a thing to happen? And then, and that's how they brought me up. But they did not force that on me at all. And then I realized that that this was a journey that was way too powerful. Being their child, dealing with all of. I grew up with so much post-traumatic stress just by being their child and being. There was not any dinner conversation that did not talk about what they had gone through. They did the best they could.
Well, science has talked about inherited almost trauma from World War II.
Yeah, exactly. And I deal with that a lot. And so along the journey, it got to the point where I needed to find some entity to unlevy some of this the heaviness of life on. So I found God and chose to.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting about money in general, as we're talking about all these themes, is it would appear that at some level, for some people, that money can make you feel so powerful that you feel like you're your own God. I mean, it's not like you're cognitively like saying that to yourself. Oh, I'm God. I'm
Right,
God.
right.
But it makes you feel almost like invincible. And so I'm sure you've come across the Maslow hierarchy of needs at some point. But
A what?
the Maslow hierarchy of needs.
Oh no, what's that?
Oh, it's this like table created by a psychologist in the 50s. He was a Jewish man from Ukraine, but he became a famous psychologist. He created this thing of like how our needs kind of stack on each other.
Right.
And so like if you are worrying about like where you're going to sleep that night,
Right.
you're not like thinking about like becoming rich and
Right.
like self-actualization and stuff
Right.
like that. And so the reason why I bring that up is because I think it's interesting because at some level I feel like people look at money as something that would make you immune to all of the problems that you just talked about,
Right.
like the grief and the loss and the
Right,
whatever.
right.
But then when those things happen to you, it like hits you really hard.
Yeah.
And then the spiritual realities that you're talking about like must be wrestled with, because it doesn't on some level make you immune to experiencing all this hardship.
I'm glad you bring that part of it up because it does. The money surely does not have any positives. Having money and being comfortable has not dampened that pain or that situation at all. I think about that actually now that you mention it, but the realities of life are not all made better by having money. There's no question about that. But relative to what you just said, go a little more. Describe that again. What the Maslow thing?
So there's a chart where basically I might as well just like pull it up for you. It's interesting, but you kind of see here where these things kind of stack on each other, and that if you're worried about, it's not a perfect system. I don't think it's a perfect depiction of reality, but I think there is a truth that like if you are worried about like where you're going to sleep or your hunger, your security, you're not thinking about how you could get a Bugatti or something like that, right? And so it's all these kind of things that need to stack on each other, and so. I don't know, you could even depict it as first world problems versus third world problems, kind of in a sense of like people who are suffering in a particular country in the world, they're not in the same headspace that people are when they're chasing money and trying to get rich and all this other stuff. And so it's just like kind of a reality that hits you about the world, And so, yeah.
Well, look, when you talked about that feeling of God, look, there is, that's why I said I try to surround myself with people who will keep me in check. Because, as I said, money is a super powerful thing, and it can really mess with your mind. And think about it. I'm a trader on the floor. There are days where I'll make a lot of money. There are days where I never lose money because I'm a broker. I'm a commission broker, so that's a good thing. But obviously, if my customer loses, it has an impact on me.
Yeah.
But I can see how it makes you. There's a certain, it definitely messes with your endorphins. Having a large, that's why.
The invincibility,
Yeah, it definitely. There's no question, and I feel it sometimes, right? There'll be, when I go and I'll take out $10,000 from the bank and I have 10 grand in my pocket of cash. You definitely feel invincible. It's just a normal reaction to it. I get why, that's a big thing now. I think there's a weird trend going on if you look at social media. All these, I'm sure you've seen it if you at least watch Instagram at all.
Yeah.
Of all these people who are now like, do you follow me? Here's a stack of 50, like Mr. Lucky or Mr. Good Money or whatever these. It's crazy. Right? I don't know if it's real or it's not, or it's just, they printed up fake money and they're giving it away. I don't even know what it is.
And the get rich quick schemes.
No, but it's like they'll drive up to someone and they'll just hand them $50,000 or whatever. Do you follow me? Do you know who I am? There's a Russian guy who does it. Mr. Goodluck, I think is his name. And it became is now caught on, right? And it's sort of, I think it's unfortunate because I think we're creating, young people who are watching social media are being given such a tainted interpretation of what money is and how important it is, and it's strange, and it's a little bit scary in a way to think of,
Yeah, there's a shock factor to that of like, oh, I'm going around giving, and it's an ego boost too. If you're the person doing that, and so it just creates this depiction of this invincibility and this aura that comes with money.
Yeah.
I think probably the most shocking stories that I've seen, there were two individuals, one in the financial crisis and then one last year. There's a case of
Tell me.
Adolf Merkel, who was during the financial crisis was worth billions of dollars, and then he ended up committing suicide.
No way.
In 2009, and then Thomas Lee was another investor last year who was worth $2 billion. And
what happened? He lost it all?
No, he didn't lose it all, but he also committed suicide.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, and so...
why did Merkel commit suicide? Did he lose his money in the crisis?
He lost some of it, but I think with the research that I was doing, that he was still at least worth hundreds of millions of dollars or billions, right? And so, when you see stories like that in the news of billionaires who take their own life, it's just like they have all the means, they have everything, and like it's almost like unfathomable to an average person. Even you're describing these people that are watching the stuff on social media, it's like it creates these two realities where like you see that and it's just like this great, amazing life, and then you see the billionaire who takes his own life, and you're like,
well, it's really important to, first of all, not at all underestimate the power of mental illness. First of all, I think we are seeing post-COVID, having lived through that COVID experience and have as much damage that it did to me, and realizing that there are millions and millions of people who got COVID, who have long COVID, who are really suffering. I mean, like really suffering, people whose lives were changed in a way, right? If I didn't have the spiritual resilience I had, I don't know what I would have done going from, somebody who could play tennis and ski and have all this, and now I have, 3 feet of titanium rods in my neck, and I have a lot of trouble moving, I think we're going to see generations of younger people come out of this COVID experience with a lot of trauma issues from that experience. I mean, think about it. You see it. There's bipolar, depression. So many different levels
PTSD,
of mental, right. That that you didn't see back in the old days, right? So these things are happening for a reason. People are suffering from a lot of problems. So think, what would make somebody with all the money in the world kill themselves? Well, obviously, either they are mentally ill in some way, or they're dealing with things that they just can't handle. As we've talked about, money can't buy your way out of mental illness and or grief. I don't, I could, dealing with all the grief I have, I could, buy myself a bunch of presents and all that stuff. What I'm noticing now with this grief thing, it has it lays in wait, right? I've filled my days with so much work, so hoping that I wouldn't have to think about how sad I am that I lost my wife. But it's like it waits for me. And at the end of the day, when I come home and I'm all by myself, it's like, there it is. It's waiting. Grief is one of those things that there's nothing that, usually in our lives, there are things, well, if I don't have this, is a good exchange, right? If I can't have ice cream, I'll have chocolate, but if I can't have, certain things, but loss and grief and some mental issues, there's no, what's the word? I can't think of it.
You can't replace the unreplaceable.
You can't, exactly. You can't replace them. There's no exchanging that up. And so, that's why people kill themselves. But also, suicide is a fascinating thing also, which I learned from my dad, that people don't, when they're at their lowest low, they don't kill themselves when they're on their low lows. They kill themselves when they're bouncing back from that, where they have they find a little bit of inner strength. And then you'll not see people at the depths of their depression kill themselves. It's usually when they're on the way back from those super low lows, when they're starting to dig themselves out of it. It's just a reality that he shared as a doctor. But
well, you've alluded multiple times to kind of what you've been through over the past 4 years.
right.
I came across like a 2021 interview that you said, and you wrote, and so you said in this interview, I have a great career, lots of friends, and a year ago was on top of the world and a level of success in my career that I could not have imagined. Now, a year later, I'm suffering through all these challenges. What does one do when your spirit is broken, your body is in pain, your mind plays tricks on you, and the future is uncertain? And so I was just like, whoa, that's like a very kind of powerful thing to say. So can you just tell us a little bit about kind of what has exactly unfolded over the past 4 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's happened over the last 4 years, I would say the COVID thing was huge. I think that was probably was one of the biggest things. Basically to be healthy and strong, have a wife, 2 kids, successful career on Wall Street, and then suddenly be so sick, almost die, and then my whole body be just sort of ravaged by long COVID and by multiple surgeries and connective tissue diseases and a lot of neural. I don't know if that's a word. Neural disorders, because everything is
all from COVID.
What? All from COVID. All from COVID, and then so that really, really challenged me in my own just spiritual strength and ability and desire to keep going. And then 4 years ago, my wife got cancer, and we were able to catch it early, and they were able to take the cancer out, and she was fine. She was cancer-free for a couple of years. And then the cancer came back a year ago, August, and her body was just ravaged by it. It spread everywhere, and she died on August 9th, 2023. So I went from having everything and being really healthy and strong to being fractured and fragile physically, and having lost my life partner and my best friend and the mother of my kids. And so, those were that's irreplaceable, right? Your body and your partner are irreplaceable. And so, I've done everything in my power to try and replace them and to deal with and process the loss physically and emotionally and grief-wise. And it is a challenge. It's probably the biggest challenge I've ever experienced. I fortunately have a really strong spirit. I am a survivor. I definitely got that from my parents. And I think that's just ingrained in my DNA. I have a boundless interest in new things. I have a love for human beings, and I love what I do, which is really important. I love my job. I've been able to reinvent myself time and time again, and broaden the spectrum and expanse of what I do for a living and what I do for fun. I've had the fortunality of having this huge social media experience happen to me, and which is amazing, and I love every minute of that. And so that has given me things to wake up for in the morning, right? I know, I don't like disappointing people, and I like to change people's lives, and I like to really participate in this new world I'm living in right now. I have 200,000 people on Instagram, which is a blast. I do a lot of content there, and I have fun. I've built this trading academy with my partner, David Green, which is called Wall Street Global Trading Academy. We have students, thousands of them all over the world. We coach and mentor them every week, and we give back a lot. We do live free master classes every month. I have 2 podcasts, and I have 2 YouTube channels, and I have all this stuff, and it's all based in service. It's based on how can one of my favorite words that people call me is the connector, right? I love connecting people. So I've taken this platform that I have and my notoriety and my fame, being this famous guy on Wall Street, and I know everybody. Everybody knows who I am. And so for me, what I love doing is connecting people, right, who perhaps paths would not have crossed if it wasn't for me, and connect them so that they can create something that's even cooler, right? That 2 individual entities put together by me are going to make something really, really special. And then, so using this as a service for educating people in financial literacy, in all the communities, Black and brown community, and marginalized people who would not be able to have access to Wall Street and to financial education. So I'm working there, and I'm doing everything in my power to fill my time to so that I don't let the grief in, and as I said, it lays in wait and it gets me at the end of the day. So
what is that like at the end of the day?
It's hard. It's really hard. It's I moved to a new apartment, and because it was too sad to be in the place where we lived for 30 years. So I created a nice new space with beautiful art. I love art, and I like art that makes me happy and smile. So it's, they're not Van Goghs, but they're cool, fun street art. And I have a gallery. I do a lot of work mentoring young artists. That's another thing I do. So I'm on this journey, which is kind of super fun, where I'm trying to connect people that wouldn't meet otherwise, and then offer them possibilities to be their best self and to share whatever journey they're on.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like you're touching on a really important thing. We're talking about happiness and stuff like that, and it seems like finding meaning in the midst of your circumstances and the hard things that you go through, and outlets of service, but then also the meaning piece is like a big thing. Is feeling like that you do have something to wake up every morning to do. And I think that's a really healthy thing for people to really wrestle with.
100%. The meaning part is the key there. I wrestle with it every day, but it's just, there's all the things we talked about. There's me still, I feel like that the story's not over. I need to tell, I owe it to my parents to bear witness to what they went through, and to also my wife and my brother, and to, I've been given this amazing platform. It's like, what can I do with it? And there's just so much amazing opportunity of connecting people to opportunity, and then create a meaning. And that's the difference between them. We're making a beautiful circle to success and fulfillment.
Yeah.
Right. Success. I've had success throughout my life in lots of ways, and with a dip here and there. But now, even in the eyes of all the grief, I'm finding huge fulfillment in being that connector.
Yeah.
In being able to take my notoriety and my fame and use it in the best way possible, whether it's through education, whether it's connecting people, whether it's, helping people be their best self. And, that is, also joy. Joy is a powerful word, right? So there's actually...
which isn't necessarily the same thing as happiness.
It's not at all the same thing. Joy is a different thing. And unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, I realized that I had lost touch with joy. I was really sad and virtually depressed, and I'm not a depressed guy. That's just not in it's not in my nature at all. So, I was sad a lot, But joy is something different. There's actually a disease. You can look it up on the internet, which is, what's the word? My phone's closed. The inability to experience joy. It's actually a syndrome. Unfortunately, my older adopted brother
Had this?
Suffers from it, where he's been able to experience joy in his life at times, but it's where there's so much trauma and stress and grief that you're not able to experience joy. And like David Meltzer is on a quest to bring joy to 1 billion people, so I hang out with him as much as possible, right? Trying to get it to rub off on me. But it's life is really, look, if I've learned anything from the experience my parents went through, life is a gift, right? It's something to be cherished and taken seriously, and it needs meaning. It absolutely needs meaning in a big way. And if it's not preordained, then you got to go out and find it.
I mean, that's really beautiful, because I think when we were talking offline, you had talked about this idea of like what you do when the chips are down.
Right.
And so you're kind of confronted when the chips are down with like what your higher power is.
Right.
And so as we're wrestling through all of these ideas, we're talking about money, like what do you think the danger is when the chips are down if that higher power is money?
I think that's a problem. Money is a means to an end, right? There's that. There used to be a bumper sticker that was around in the 60s. If you probably go to the internet, you could pull it up. It said, "Drugs will get you through times of no money, but money won't get you through times of no drugs." Right? It was like "Keep on Truckin'." It was a Grateful Dead bumper sticker.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, how important is money? And at the end of the day, it is really important. But it is just a means to an end, and I think it really is more about freedom than it is about happiness, for sure. And it's a matter of is there any amount of money now that could help me pacify my grief? Absolutely not. There's nothing that could do it. That human element that human element is a thread that goes throughout my life. It's was a big part of who my dad was. It's, for him to do what he did back there with John Paul, that was all about human. It was more important to him to have been able to spend that year with this young boy and to make his quality of life any better than all the money in the world. He did not. My father didn't have
it's an act of
pot
love.
to piss in.
I mean, it's really
right.
An act
He
of
had
love,
nothing. He had no. He was just starting out on a practice. He was an immigrant in a country. He had absolutely nothing, and it's clear that the but it was not important.
It's really interesting because there's we talk about science a lot, and I do believe a lot in scientific ideas that have a wealth of evidence behind them. And so there's a social scientist named Arthur Brooks who wrote a book called The Art and Science of Getting Happier. It was like a New York Times bestseller last fall, but he talked about these kind of 4 pillars of happiness, which have all come up in what we're talking about.
Oh, really?
Here.
Tell me.
Yeah. So he said family, friendship, faith, which is like the spiritual, the bigger picture. And then the last one was work, but that's really about like service, like and finding meaning in your work and stuff like that. And so I think it's so powerful to like the big picture to zoom out and to be cognizant of those things and like what is actually going to lead to a fulfilling life. And even if happiness is kind of like this roller coaster, the pursuit of joy, like you're talking about, I think is a really interesting thing. And so I think, the 2 places I want to land is like obviously you've talked about getting this kind of like more a better healthier view of like money, and so and the role that it should play in our lives. And so as we're building wealth and you're really invested in like the next generation, helping people do that, what do you feel like our end game should be as we're doing that, as we're like making the wise decisions to invest in things that will appreciate over time? Like, is there a mindset that you would encourage people to have as they're doing that?
Well, I think that mindset goes back to the invest in stocks and not stuff. I think
Yeah.
people need to, I mean, if we're in this new generation where we can all have access to this platform, anybody can really go out there and create themselves a web page, create themselves a this or a that. I mean, it's amazing what's out there, whether you're using AI tools or whether you're using social media, whether you're using whatever. What one can, look, there are two roads you can go down. You can just be sort of selfish and go out there and make a bunch of money and do that. Or, there's, I'm baffled by the, right now we're in this state of a really kind of, I didn't think it was going to affect me that much, but it does, where there's such discord amongst people, right? It's like, so if you and I are on the different sides of the political spectrum, and we can't have Thanksgiving dinner together anymore, right? It's like in the old days, you could believe in one thing and I could believe in another, and you could have your opinions, I could have mine, and we'd have a Thanksgiving dinner, we'd argue and have fun, have a couple of, schnapps together, and then at the end of the day, give you a hug and goodbye and see you next year. That's not happening any longer. There's if we don't agree on something, well, then we are just like, it's just like a slashing sword. And that's upsetting to me. And so, I don't know where that came from, but I just sort of thought of it. But, what is the end game that, I think that people, it's like David Meltzer's quest, one person at a time. So if you read, and you should, I don't read, my brain doesn't process books. I haven't read a book since The Cat in the Hat. So, but I did like The Cat in the Hat, and I've read it a few times since then. But the ability of one person connecting someone to another person, one to one, and then that growing and all of that, and how that can really change the world in a big way, it works, and it's possible, where that you can do that. You can actually literally change the world and change. I'm not trying to change people's opinions and views, but you can
make an impact. Yeah,
you can make an impact one person at a time. One person talking to another person can have an impact.
Do you think that, as we think about building wealth in the end game, do you think it's possible for someone to get rich too quickly?
I think so, absolutely. As I said, it's just a matter of what you do with the money. I've run into two different people. I've run into people who made a bunch of money on crypto, on meme coins, on the trading the stock market during COVID, right? A bunch of people were Roaring Kitty or GameStop or whatever.
Roaring Kitty.
Right, Roaring Kitty, and where people made tons of money and then just didn't know what to do with it, and and then there were people who, it happened fast, it happened furious, and they didn't know what to do with it, right? It got the better of them. We know I'm sure you've read those stories about, 75% of the people who win the lottery, it ends up destroying their lives, right? Curiously enough, right? It's whether it's
kind of weird, yeah.
Right? Like, that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. That's a fact, right? They've tracked people who have actually won the lottery here in America. That a majority of them, it's destroyed their lives.
So you need to know the value of a dollar then, with what you're talking about.
You need to understand the power of that little piece of paper in your pocket, right? For the good and for the bad, right? And there's so much good that can be done with it. While, and I'm not telling everybody to give shit away, but it's amazing. Have you ever just walked down the street and just, gave $1 to every homeless guy you've seen on the street, right? I mean, or stopped somebody and said, what's going, look, there's that we've sort of been dehumanized in a way, unfortunately, because of this. People hide behind it. They bully people in front of it. They don't know. We have this new generation of kids who really don't know how to communicate face to face, eye to eye with people. That's a shame.
I mean, I think those are really good thoughts. I think, we don't think about those things, especially, going back to the thing that you were just talking about, someone just handing out $50,000, just on, it's just we don't, we just see money, and then it's just like we want it, and then we get it, and then we don't really know what to do with it outside of just spend it on stuff and use it perhaps in ways that aren't healthy or wise.
Right.
Do you I mean, another question would be, do you think that there's such thing as too much wealth?
Is it bad that one person has so much money? You know what? If they made their money doing what they do, then no, I don't think so. You know, I mean, everybody's entitled to make money and keep the money that they make. You know, but it has a power. It has a power of its own in a big way, and you know, and it can be useful. It can be used for good, and it can be used for bad. You know, and look, I want everyone to be successful and have what they want and do good things with other people, and you know, and kumbaya and it's a beautiful day type of stuff. But I just find, and this is just an observation, I just find that social media has given us this weird relationship to money that I just don't know what the end game is yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just kind of wonder if you're like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old looking at that going like, you know, or how is that going to affect people? And, you know, it's just learning, you know, building character and learning things like that, you know, it's a challenge, you know. I mean, I have 2 kids, and I think my wife did a really good job bringing them up. They're good kids.
Do you think there's indicators or warning signs when maybe we're starting to go a little bit off course in our perspective of money, even on whatever, quote unquote, the way up, like you're investing in the stock market, you're trading, you're whatever, we talked about the S&P earlier, your fund is going up. Do you think there's indicators or heart check that we could do of like, oh, things are starting to get a little weird here?
Yeah, I think so. No question about it. I think. I mean, I just, you know, I look at the visuals of what goes on social media is a screaming red flag when it comes to that. You know, I think we've lost huge perspective of what money is all about, what you can do with it, what's important about it, how important is it. You know, if you get it, what you should do with it. You know. You know, we've seen it, how it can split up families. It can destroy people's lives, you know. And don't get me wrong, I love money just like the next guy. And I like nice things, and I love to buy stuff. And I love, you know, but for me, I love sharing it with my kids. You know, I love giving them things that they like. I like to, you know, help people out. But there's no question that we're in a strange state.
Well, you know, I really wanted to kind of land and close with talking about, I think it would be good to leave people with a few things that they could do to build wealth, like in a wise manner. I mean, you mentioned the thing about Roaring Kitty earlier. And so, I mean, we saw the movie that came, I mean, literally a movie came out about this like 2 years later about the whole thing that with GameStop. And so there's this new advent that's happening and craze around apps like Robinhood and stuff like that. And so, you know, most people listening to this might be newbies to the stock market. Like, what do you think about like what's happening there? Retail traders just jumping into the stock market, just buying things. Like, do you think that that's a smart thing to do?
Historically, over the last 100 years, there have been crazy barriers to entry for your general Joe and Jane to get into the stock market. You needed to be an accredited investor to be able to buy or sell stock.
Yeah.
Okay, your grandfather, your grandmother, they had to prove that whatever money they put into the stock market, if they lost 100% of it, it would have no effect on their standard of living for 5 years. That's what an accredited investor means. And in order for you to open up a brokerage account at Merrill Lynch or Smith Barney, wherever it was, you had to prove that. Well, that really maintains exclusivity to the 1% of the 1%. Who can say that, right? I mean, only wealthy people, and that's what kept it at that level. What ended up happening around the time of COVID, which was the perfect storm, with Robinhood and this what's called the democratization of the trading community, right? Where everybody suddenly who has an iPhone and $100 are suddenly able to trade the stock market.
Yeah.
That never happened before. And it all happened at once. It happened at a time where everyone's got COVID, they're sheltered in place, everyone's got a stimulus check. Robinhood and Webull suddenly show up. So there's all these free trading apps. And then you've got the Wall Street Bets and Wall Street Bulls, and you got Roaring Kitty, and you have the meme stock phenomenon all happening. And it was this incredible perfect storm. And suddenly you had people, stocks going from 2 to 483 and down to 3, right? And you had all these people posting things on Reddit and everywhere, making millions and millions of dollars, when basically in reality, probably 88% of them did not make money and they lost money, right? 85% of retail traders do not make money, or day traders, they lose money. And surely this was no difference. I analyzed, one of the things I do, I'm a forensic broker, I analyze market movement, and I took time to analyze the meme phenomenon because I talked a lot about it, about the movement, what happened when the stock went from 2 to 483 and back to 150, right? The volume and who was involved, did anybody make money, blah, blah, blah. And what ended up happening was the biggest mistake that was made was if you want to become a pilot, you don't just go to Teterboro Airport, grab a set of keys, hop in the plane and fly, hope it works out. Right? You spend 160 hours doing books. You spend 200 hours with a co-pilot. You do all this before you get on a plane. Suddenly, people are able to have, access to the stock market, and there's not one of these organizations, not one of these platforms offers any kind of education to the platform. It's like if you were never invited to my house for my famous Saturday night party, right? And then suddenly all barriers were out, and come on over.
Which is even different than 10 years ago with if you're investing in Fidelity or putting money in there. And now it's just different. Download it app, boom.
Correct.
There you go.
Suddenly I invite you to my party, and I don't warn you that if you drink 12 shots of tequila, you're going to get sick and start puking on the side of the road. No one was given any ground rules, no playbook, no procedure. They were just given access to a party that they wanted desperately to be part of for years. And now, in the midst of this crazy storm with all these components, like COVID, stimulus checks, meme phenomenon, Reddit, memes, blah, blah, all of this coming together in this crazy hurricane, but there's no education, okay? You had somebody commit suicide, right? A guy who went on Robinhood, who ended up spending his, grandma's money, and he lost it all and he killed himself.
I think that was in the movie too, yeah.
It was, yeah. So anyway, the democratization part, I loved that part of it, even though, Wall Street likes to be very exclusive. I love to embrace, I've made a point of it the last 4 years to embrace the new young retail investor and do everything in my power with my partner David Green at Wall Street Global to educate them, motivate them, inspire them, to learn, to get the playbook. However, how irresponsible it was that all this happened and these guys came out, Robinhood and eToro and all these other companies that were suddenly a free trading app, to not have any education around, well, this is what happens when you buy a stock, sell a stock, this is what happens, how do you protect your downside, these are the rules, stop orders, risk management, all that stuff. None of it was ever done. And so while I love the fact that the opportunity and all the barriers to entry are down, the fact that there was no procedure in place to educate these 50 million people at minimum suddenly came out of nowhere and suddenly started trade the stock market.
Such a wild
okay?
number.
And millions and billions were lost. And I know everybody posts on the internet, with stacks of 10,000s on the back of a Bugatti claiming they made millions of dollars trading GameStop. 8 out of 10 of those people are full of shit, right? They didn't. They bought it, they bought it at 50 and they're still low. They call me all the time going, I still have GameStop at $420. What do I do? I own Rivian at $90. What do I do? I have AMC at $70. What do I do?
Probably never going back there,
right?
Yeah.
And so what it turns out, it's funny you asked this question at the end, because one of the things that David Green, David Green's the guy who started on Wall Street together. He went on to become a market maker. He retired at 38, went on to try and trade the market on his own, not being a market maker. He lost $300,000 in 3 months. He said, oh, this is not sustainable. Went out and he taught himself technical analysis. and as a private trading room. He and I have been friends for 40 years. We sat down when this whole thing was happening with COVID and with Robinhood, and we said, why don't we curate a course and teach people how to trade stock using technical analysis and risk management. So we spent 6 months curating a course. It's 21 videos, 21 hours, 400 hours of archival content, and what we do is we coach and mentor every student. So every student who buys our course on Thursday night, we all get together, all the students, and we coach and mentor them every Thursday live on Zoom, right? So we're the only guys out there. There are a million courses out there to learn how to trade the market, but nobody coaches and mentors live. So we do that every Thursday night with everybody. Now we have a boot camp where people who buy the course can then go and spend a week in David's private trading room.
Yeah.
So I'm saying all this to say is I think it's horrifying that they did it without the education part. There is a way. I would love everybody to look. Day trading is not for everybody. It is a way to make some disposable income. It is a skill that you think I have an opinion about this. There's a skill so our students are comprised of people who lost their jobs and are trying to make some money.
Yeah.
People who tried the retail game and just didn't get it and need really to learn the rules. People who don't know a stock from a stock and would love, they see all their friends making all this money trading the stock market and would love to get involved, those people. And or a college student who wants to be able to talk in a fairly intelligent manner when he goes for a job interview or he goes for a college interview. He can sit down and go, I know what goes on Wall Street. Yeah. All that, that's our demographic. Right, and so we put a lot of work and time into this thing, because we are. I'm horrified that it was not done, and that because I know for a fact that 80% of the people who got their feet wet around the meme stocks, around all that stuff at COVID, lost fortunes. They are just now licking their wounds and coming back to try it again. Now that things have settled down. They all blew up. They lost everything. They blew up all their trading accounts. They let a few years go by, and now they're starting to tiptoe back, calling us and saying, I got to try it again because I see all the markets trading at record highs.
So what I'm hearing is just it's not a bad thing, and it could be even a good thing to want to explore jumping in, but you need to do it responsibly. You need to do it with education. And before just jumping in and doing something.
It's a great thing that the barriers are down.
Yeah.
It is not a joke and it's not a get-rich-quick scheme, okay? It is real. It's real money, and I know money does funny things to people. We've just spent 2 hours talking about it. But it's an amazing opportunity that was never there for everybody.
Yeah.
But you need the playbook. You need the rules before you do it. Because you can lose a lot of money, you can lose all your money, you can in fact lose more money than you even put in.
Yeah, that's just devastating.
Right.
I mean, and the story for the GameStop people.
Exactly. And we're in an environment where the volatility is such that it's crazy. Yeah. Right? You don't first of all, you don't get on a plane if you don't know how to fly it. You surely don't get on a plane if the weather's bad. And right now, for the last 2 years, the weather's been rough. Right? The stock market has been going through crazy wild times, right? Bull markets, bear market, all happening in 3 hours. Things that used to take a generation to happen now happens before lunchtime, right? So,
you could get burned.
You can get burned.
I mean, so some other just kind of rapid fire things.
Sure.
Other investments, real estate, do you think that's...
Obviously, I have lots of friends and I follow people who are big into real estate. It's obviously an amazing way to make money. I don't know if the environment right now is great for it because interest rates are high. And my understanding is higher interest rates for longer makes it a little bit harder in the real estate game. So I don't have anything really intelligent to say about that.
What about saving versus spending money versus accumulating debt, stuff like that? Any
right. Well, so once again, there are parts of that game. There are people who are really good at that stuff. I think, like I said, I think people should understand that there is a long view that you can invest in stocks and not stuff. And there's a way that saving money is good, but putting money to work in the stock market is really an important thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody should have an investment account where they put,
Money away.
I've heard it said that if you put $50 a month or $200 a month in the S&P 500, that it can potentially be a profitable long-term experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Good.
So, that the stock market is an amazing entity. Now that you've been invited to the party, people should do a little studying and get involved.
Yeah. The last kind of thing, just a little quick thing I want to kind of land on is like, just to kind of wrap up the whole conversation, was that, a lot of the ideas that you talked about, it's almost like you were met with those realities in suffering. And so do you feel like, a lot of times when we pursue a grandiose life, or we pursue wealth in maybe ways that aren't so beneficial, it's like we're not really thinking about the fact that life is kind of finite, and that it's like that one day we're all going to be gone, and that we're going to die. And so do you think, like, you've shared so much wisdom today, do you feel like there's it's like required that you need to suffer? And I'm saying that people need to go pursue suffering, but that they need to experience some sort of suffering to be hit with that reality and really renew their perspective on life.
I hear your question. See, we learn more from failure than we do from success, right? It's not a matter how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up and keep going, right? And also, not my line, but a really important line. And I would not wish grief, sadness, and loss on anybody, because there's no guarantee that you will handle it, and it will not destroy your life, because it destroys so many lives. These hard times build character, no question about it. Can you build character without those things having it? Absolutely. Avail yourself of, talk to people, find a mentor. It's a great thing that for every experience that you want, good and bad, there's someone out there who had it, who did it, who experienced it, who failed at it, and who succeeded at it, right? Find them. Go out there and talk to them. Call them up. There's whether it's, Gary Vee or Tony Robbins or just some schmeg on the street, everybody's out there telling their story. That's where we learn from other people's experience, right?
That's good. Yeah.
What is that? Hope is hear other people's experience. But, all the things that we're going to go through that are hard, somebody's experienced and's gotten through it. Ask them how they did it. That's really an important way to do it. And in this crazy world, you can hear somebody share something on Instagram. You can DM them because they've shared something that's really kind of meaningful and powerful, like you just lost your grandma and you don't know what to do, whether it's grief or whether it's finance related or whether it's educational or whatever. Somebody's telling that story. If there's anything good that comes of this, it's that you can connect to somebody who's experienced virtually everything that you're going to or are afraid of. Life is super challenging. Every generation has had to deal with different things. My parents' generation had to deal with the friggin' Holocaust. People in the 50s and 60s had to deal with Vietnam or whatever that social experiment was. People in the 70s and 80s had to deal with, drugs and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And now people have to deal with social media and the fact that, everybody hates each other, and there's such discord amongst all of us. So life on the bare level is ruthless. It's not forgiving at all. Nothing is guaranteed here. Kindness and gratitude are super important things that we need to really wake up with every single morning. There are wonderful things that I've learned along the way that really lead one to have a good, strong, positive life. And then look, but there's the Mike Tyson. It's all fun and games till you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
Right. It's you can be riding the wave and it's all good, and then somebody dies or something terrible happens. I would say one of the most important things is that if one is struggling, ask for help. We are afraid. That's probably one of the biggest flaws that we are as people, is people are afraid to ask other people for help.
Yeah.
Because the help is out there somewhere.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all this wisdom today. Yeah. It's been
My pleasure.
incredible. Thank you so much for being
Cool.
here.
I enjoy that. That was fun.